just because my lived experience is one way doesn't mean that somebody else's is completely different, and that somebody else's lived experience may be very contradictory to my lived experience, and that we may have both unique realities and we may see the world from very different realities. And that doesn't mean that either one of us is wrong or like our realities are wrong. Well, Alva, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It is a pleasure having you here. I know you and I have crossed paths in the James Wedmore BBD world. And I think it was actually this last BBD, I think, sitting right behind you. And I paired up with your husband on one of the exercises or something like that. And you later wrote to me and you're like, oh, were you the one that was telling Luca about chocolate milk? So it's been great to kind of see you from afar. And then now actually to be able to connect with you and talk with you and share about your story and things like that. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me, Renee. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, excited that our paths crossed indirectly and now directly. And Luca was very excited that I was talking to the chocolate milk lady, as you are now referred to.
And to be referred as anything, the chocolate milk lady would be one I would not be upset about. Like, and I don't know if I told you this, but my son's name is Luca too. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's kind of fun when I don't meet many adults named Luca. There's a lot of young boys named Luca these days, but not as many adults. So
yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. So yeah, I know we are going to talk about so much today. I know when you sent over some information about like what you would want to talk about, I was like 1000%. I would love this. This is a conversation that doesn't even need to be like, you and I don't even need a phone chat to like see if this is the right fit. Like I just knew that this would be good. So before we dive into that, I would love for those that don't know you already, just share a little bit about you, your story, your journey. Yeah, why are you here?
Yeah. The eternal question. Why?
Yes.
So, where do I start? So, I guess just some context as it really permeates everything that I do. I was born with cerebral palsy, so I have that disability. It impacts me in a multitude of ways, obviously. I should say, most obviously, right now, my speech, but I also have spasticity and use a wheelchair most of the time or a walker part of the time. And, as a woman with a disability who has had that disability since birth, that's really, again, permeated kind of everything I do in one way or another. And my identity in a very big way. I always say my disability is not who I am, but it has made me who I am.
So good.
And that is very true in my business. So, I guess if I start at the very beginning, I have been a public speaker since I was 8 years old. My very first speaking gig was 8 years old at my dad's university. He was a professor, and a colleague of his was also a professor, but for special ed teachers. And he asked my dad if I would come and speak to these students about my experience not being in special ed, having a disability, and how I navigated school.
Yeah.
And that was it. Like, I got bitten by the public speaking bug, and 26, 27, I can't do math. Years later, here I am. And one of the things I say about my disability is I've never known privilege of anonymity. when it comes to my disability.
Yeah.
So, and that's visibly, that's auditorily, like you see me, you know. You hear
Yeah.
me, you know. And that comes with people staring,
Hmm.
people asking super inappropriate questions at super inappropriate times that comes
Yeah.
with, a whole host of things. I, in addition to just loving public speaking, it was kind of like, well, people are gonna stare at me. People are
Hmm.
gonna ask the super inappropriate questions anyway.
Hmm.
Why don't I get paid to answer them
I
and
love
get
it.
paid to talk about it? So that's, you know, there are obviously a lot more specifics to how I got into my business, the
Yeah.
portrait perspective, which I launched officially in 2021. That's really how my public speaking career got started.
That's so beautiful. And I think, it just kind of goes to these things of like sometimes the things that we're given are part of our purpose, right?
Yeah,
And like part of the things that the impact that you are having in the world on the people around you is by you fully embracing those things that make you different, that make you, I don't want to say odd, but I think we all are odd. Like I tell
yeah,
my kids all the time, I'm like, you are weird. Like everybody is weird. And when we all embrace our weirdness, that's what makes the impact. And so like for you, it's like that's what I see you doing. You're like, this is who I am, and I'm gonna fully embrace it. And I'm gonna
yeah.
let that be the thing that creates that impact in the world. This is like totally maybe a little bit different, but like what's one of the most uncomfortable or inappropriate questions you've ever been asked?
So it's funny because this happened, was it last week? I think it was last week or the week before. One of the questions that I get all the time, like more often than you would think people would think this is okay to ask, I get, what's wrong with you? All the
Mm.
time. To which I love to answer, nothing, what's wrong with you? Which just like throws people off because they like can't compute that there's nothing wrong with me.
Mhm.
And then it's like I flip it on them and they're like, well, obviously nothing is wrong with me. Like, why is she asking it? But anyway,
Yeah.
so I get that a lot.
Yeah.
But last week I was with Luca. He was uh donating blood and
Hmm.
I was there for moral support. It was being held at a church.
Hmm.
And, I'm not religious. I respect every and all religions. People can do what they want to do, but I'm not religious. And I will say many of the awkward, inappropriate interactions that I've had have been with people who are. And, it's well intentioned, it's coming from a good place. Know that, I get that. There's a lot of like, oh, you haven't been saved yet, or oh, what did you do? Like, you
Yeah.
must have done something in a past life, or, things like that. But I was sitting waiting for the cut to be done, and the organizer of the blood drive, who was associated with the church, came over and he was chatting and asked like, "Oh, are you waiting?" And I was like, "No, I'm here with my husband." Blah, blah. And he suddenly gets very quiet, and he turns and he goes, "What afflicts you? What
Mhm.
afflicts you?" And I had never heard it phrased that way.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what, and, my sassy auto response that came into my head was, besides this interaction, nothing. But I figured that was probably not the best way to answer that. So I was like, well, nothing affects me, but I have a disability. So if that's what you're asking, I have cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me how people just like don't know how to process that.
Yeah.
When I say nothing is wrong with me,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, clearly something is. So
Yeah.
how could she possibly be saying there isn't?
Hmm.
And I usually kind of just leave it at that, and they leave or I leave or I start talking to somebody else. But yeah, it's always that tricky thing of like, I know that if I'm overtly rude, if
Hmm.
I'm sassy in the way I want to be, it
Yeah.
interpreted as rude, and whoever that person is will likely make the assumed connection that all people with disabilities are bitter and angry and rude and whatever, whatever, whatever. So it's this hard dynamic that I'm
Hmm.
always navigating, where it's like I kind of want to call people out on, like, you would not go up to somebody without a disability and
Yeah.
ask them a probing question like this. Why do
Totally.
you think it's okay to do that with
Yeah.
me? With recognizing that that's the reality, and it's better to just educate people and
Hmm.
help remove that stigma and that
Hmm.
prejudice.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's trickier than others.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and like, I mean, I hear your humor and you're like, these things do hurt, right? Like regardless even you are like, I've learned to just like hear these, receive these, but they are stingy. Like they're not nice and they're uncomfortable. But like what you've done is like interpreted it with more of this humor of realizing like it's not about me.
Yeah.
But like in that, like you said multiple times, like it's not me, right? Like there's nothing wrong with me.
Mm.
I would love to know what it is that gave you that confidence despite everybody else in the world telling you something different, right? Because I think as women without a disability, there's a lot of women that lacked kind of that self confidence when the rest of the world is pinging on them. And I think for you, like you have that more even blatantly bigger. It's like bigger. You're getting more of that judgment, more of that criticism than probably me or, somebody else or whatever. And so to develop that sense of confidence, to develop that sense of identity, right? Like I think that there's a lot of identity work that you've probably done around yourself and like who I really am, despite what my body is doing and despite what it comes across or how it says and how it sounds. Like I know who I am. And it sounds like that is very unwavering for you. And I think that that's something, even me, I'm like, dude, how do I get that's like such unwavering confidence like that? Also recognizing that it's not going to always be like, I'm sure you have moments where you're like, this kind of sucks. And I hate that people ask me these questions.
Oh yeah.
But like, what do you think has given you that sense of identity and owning who you are?
Hands down, my mom.
Mm.
Like I hit the mom jackpot.
That's awesome.
No question. My mom is able-bodied. Everyone in my immediate family is able-bodied. So I was very much the only in a
Mhm.
lot of aspects of my life.
Yeah.
And my mom did a fantastic job at not only educating herself of
Mhm.
what the disability experience and what resources were available, what avenues to take, etc., etc. But she also, as I was growing up, made sure that I had adults with disabilities in my life that I could go to and ask questions or problem solve with or
Yeah.
vent with about how much people suck,
Yeah.
and have that type of support as well. Even so, that was very foundational to my sense of self. She also, you know, like I said before, my disability isn't who I am, it's part of who I am. And she really supported a childhood, supported that sense of self, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I went to summer camp, I did after school activities, I did
Mm-hmm.
sports, I swam every week of my life, starting at 5 until I
Mm-hmm.
18. I did skiing, I did horseback riding, theater camp. She really fostered that. Let's figure out who you are, or, let you figure out who you are
Yeah.
as a person
Yeah.
and what needs to happen pertaining to your disability in order to let you do that, and then do that fully.
That's
From a very young age, well, again, obviously, my disability was always present and always a
awesome.
factor. Was growing up, I was never Alva, the family member with CP.
Yeah.
I was just Alva.
Yeah.
And I think that was super helpful to just grow up with that presumed ability and
Mm-hmm.
presumed way of approaching things. And so everything that followed, that was kind of how I approached it.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And is your mom still alive?
Yeah.
So she gets to see you like standing in all your glory, standing on stage and doing all the things.
Yes.
Well, yes. I mean, like when I say, yeah, I should metaphorically standing, but you said you do use your walker at times.
Mostly for exercise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's beautiful.
And I love that you say that because that's a perfect example. I do, right? Like just a slight language
Totally.
shift of like, no, I don't walk into a room, I enter a room.
Yes.
And everybody enters a room. Why do
Totally.
we have to specify how they do it?
Totally. I think you're bringing up the same, like, this is a similar type of conversation with racism and things like that, too, is like really looking at the privilege and the ways of being and how we show up. Like, I know I wrote an email, I sent it out to my audience. I don't even remember off the top of my head. I was talking about like when I was a teenager and I would go to the tanning booth and I would tan and I was like I thought like tanning my body was the thing that was going to make me look beautiful and amazing and whatever, and that now being diagnosed with melanoma, I'm like tan is not the thing, like tan is not in, right? And I spoke it from this lens of my own experience, right? And I spoke about like, and in the email I said like white is the new tan, like white's the new in thing. And I had somebody write back and kind of point out that it was uninclusive of the people who are already tan to begin with, and that's not inclusive to every person. And it was like a subtle little thing that like in my mind I had no idea, right? Like I'm just in my mind I'm thinking like, oh yeah, like white is the new tan, like white's the new beautiful, and
Right.
how that simple little thing could be portrayed as telling her that she's not beautiful because she's not white and that she can't get to that white place. And I think it's just that like importance of us when we have to like I don't want to personally, I feel like we can get too cautious about what we're talking about and too careful, and then we lose the potency of what we're really trying to talk about. But
Yeah.
it's also balanced with this idea of how can we be fully aware and present with like our own lived experience and the privileges or the expectations or whatever it might be based on our own experience, and
Yeah.
how can we perceive that my own experience is completely different than somebody else's experience. And especially in today's culture and in our society with politics and things like that, I think that is the missing element, the
Yeah.
missing piece of just because my lived experience is one way doesn't mean that somebody else's is completely different, and that somebody else's lived experience may be very contradictory to my lived experience, and that we
Yeah.
may have both unique realities and we may see the world from very different realities. And that doesn't mean that either one of us is wrong or like our realities are wrong. And I think that that's what's happened in our world right now, is
Yeah.
that we have too many people seeing their world from their own reality and thinking that is the only one right way to see the world, instead of being open, like you said. Like, it's a subtle shift, it's a subtle thing, like talking about like, hey, that person entered the room is a insignificant change in my vocabulary but it makes a huge impact for somebody else. And so how can we just be mindful and aware of those small little shifts and changes that we can make that make somebody feel included and make
Yeah.
somebody feel totally different?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And do so without then, to your point, in turn, excluding somebody else.
Yeah.
Because just that shit, like we all enter space. Like if we go into space, we are entering a space. So,
Mm.
it's not by saying, like, if I said, oh, you should say rolling into space, then I'm eliminating or silencing people that do walk in
Yeah.
space, or people that use crutches to go into space, or
Yeah.
good or whatever. Like, so,
Hmm.
yeah, I think too often, to your point, it's too much of like the exact opposite
Yeah.
of exactly what was said, as opposed to, no, it's not about the opposite. It's about just a different word that
Mhm.
is inclusive across the board.
I don't know if you have seen it, but there was a meme I saw, or like a like cartoon drawing that I had seen kind of floating around in the last couple of months. And it was an image of like a staircase and then a ramp. So it was
Mhm.
like a staircase right next to a ramp. And it was, I don't remember the exact phrase of it, but it was essentially along the lines of like seeking inclusivity and acceptance isn't about I'm gonna botch the like messaging of how it worked because it was like so concise, but
Yeah.
essentially like having the ramp doesn't negate the people that can walk up the stairs. They can go up the ramp as well. Like, it's not like having the ramp is now putting the people that can walk up the stairs at a disadvantage. It's just now making it inclusive for those that can't walk up the stairs, right?
Right.
Like, it was, I mean, like I said, it was like a super short, punchy little statement. I'm like watching it, but it was like, that is really, truly what inclusivity, whether it's about your body or whether it's about your sexuality or whether it's about your race or whatever it might be, that inclusivity isn't intended to be that it's a now infringing on somebody else's rights. It's like, how do we just make this that like everybody has the same equal?
Universal design is my like foundational approach to
Mm-hmm.
everything I do, because universal design can apply to built spaces, it can apply to processes, it can apply to systems, like, but if you go into it with the approach of like, let's make this as inclusive and accessible for as many people as possible, you're gonna save yourself, those people, your budget, your time, like
Yeah.
so much over and over again.
Yeah. Totally. I know that when you and I talked originally and like you had messaged about being on the podcast, you had talked about like, you're like, I'd be happy to share about what it's been like as a woman with a period or menstrual cycle, sexuality, like all of those types of things around like what that looks like for me as a woman with CP. And I was like, yes, this is a like great conversation. One, I mean, as an occupational therapist, like one of my practice, like one of our like I don't want to say Bibles, but like our practice manuals as a therapist, it covers that area of topic around sexuality and things like that. But it's one of those things like personally me working in the NICU, not somewhere I'm not talking about it with my itty bitty little babies, but thinking about like people with a traumatic brain injury or a car accident or CP or a whole host of spinal cord injury, like so many things. It's still, even as an occupational therapist with it, like as a part of my practice area, I still don't think it's a conversation that a lot of people are having. I think it's one of those things that is still kind of I mean, it's a taboo topic. It's a taboo topic for everybody to have that conversation. For like, one, we're just going to talk about periods and sexuality stuff in the first place. That's a taboo of its own. Yeah. And then now two, we're layering in some sort of disability or other layer factor to it. Now it's like amplified the taboo-ishness, I guess, in a way. So, but I think it's really important. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's a conversation of like me as, like you said, like an able-bodied person to have the comprehension and awareness of like other people's lived experience and what this might look like. And I know particularly around just periods in general, there's a lot of new conversation coming up around like accessibility for women or like teens in poverty and things like that, just to even like basic body care products and like how that's not even a conversation that we're talking about. And so I think that this is one of those areas like we really need to start talking about like the lived experiences of people around their periods and around their bodies and how we can increase that inclusivity and accessibility all the way around the way. So whatever, I'll like just drop it there and leave it there and let you kind of kick off whatever you want to start sharing or like what's coming up for you related to that.
I love that. Ready, go.
That fire on a massive big taboo topic. Like, where are you going to take us, Alva?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, disability and sexuality as a whole has been specific avenue that I've been super passionate about my whole life, but really recognizing the need to talk specifically about that much more in the last, I'd say, 5, 6 years. Because, that taboo, that foundational taboo nature that surrounds disability anyway is so exacerbated when it comes to puberty, sex, sexual activity, gender, sexuality, like all the things. And what's unfortunately happening more and more is, hopefully not more and more, but far too often, is that parents, doctors, day programs, support professionals, therapists are kind of just avoiding it and thinking, oh, if we don't talk about it, this person won't experience it. And that's so far from the truth and often leads to way more detriment and dangerous outcome than not. I won't go too far down this thread, but like especially for people with developmental disabilities, we're seeing such higher rates of sexual abuse in communities because they're not being taught autonomy over their bodies. Not being taught what appropriate touch or inappropriate touch is. And in the disability experience, if you think about it, I'll just say we as a community grow up with doctors, touching us, therapists touching us,
Hmm.
therapists undressing us, doctors undressing us, family undressing us,
Yeah.
and that there's no conversation about consent being had. And so, unfortunately, makes sense if you grow up with everybody in your life just undressing you and touching your body in whatever ways they want without teaching and demonstrating consent. It's not a far leap to then have that lead very, very easily to sexual assault, sexual abuse,
Yeah.
etc. And so that's why I'm so passionate about talking about it and trying to get to talk about it, because it's like I get that it's uncomfortable. I get that you might not totally know, but by not talking about it, not only are you not helping the person,
Mhm.
you are actively potentially endangering them down
Yeah.
the road. Um, so to feel more positive, I was very lucky in that my mom,
Yeah.
uh, really made sure that I was getting all the same education, all the same, shifts in medical care as I aged that an able-bodied kid would get. Like I was in sex ed. Oh my goodness, I think I took sex ed like 7 times throughout school. I don't know why. It was taught like every year for like 4 or 5 years.
Where did you grow up?
California.
Oh, okay. I'm in California too. Maybe, I mean, California tends to be a little bit more progressive in that area.
Yeah. Okay. And then, I was also in Girl Scouts.
Mm.
My mom was a troop leader for a few years, and she even had a sex ed teacher come to our Girl Scout troop meeting and talk to us just as girls, because that's the thing I don't really get about sex ed is absolutely boys should learn about girls, girls should learn about boys, absolutely, like everybody should learn about everybody.
Hmm.
And people who identify as one or the other should also have time to learn about it without the other.
Totally.
So I was super lucky that I had that foundational education. My doctor started talking to me about puberty at the same age she would have talked about it with any other of her patients. And what I really appreciated about my doctor, who unfortunately is not my doctor anymore, is when she talked to me about it, specifically around my period and birth control, is she talked to me about, all my options. Like, you can do the pill, you can do, an IUD, you can do the injection, you can do the shot, you can, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember when I decided to go on birth control, which was in college, and I was kind of like, okay, I'm starting to maybe, hopefully, boys will start to notice me, and maybe this will start happening.
Yeah.
It didn't happen until after I graduated, but I had hope. And so I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to go on birth control. And, I think I want to do the copper IUD because
Mhm.
I don't want hormones, I want more natural, blah, blah. And she, to this day, I'm so appreciative of
Mhm.
how she approached this conversation. She told me all the standard things that you would tell a patient.
Mhm.
But then she was like, one thing to consider about the copper IUD specifically is it does make your period a lot heavier, which I knew, but she was like, so I was like, yeah, I know, duh. She's like, okay, but you you work with personal attendants to
Mhm.
go to the bathroom and get dressed and shower and et cetera, et cetera. That's gonna add a whole layer of logistics
Yeah.
to your life that you should just be aware of.
Mhm.
And it was something that like hadn't even crossed my mind.
Mhm.
And thank goodness she said that because I was like, oh yeah, I don't want to, I'm lucky if I get to pee once or twice throughout the day.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to go to the bathroom 5 times a day to change a pad
Yeah.
because my flow is so much heavier. Like that really won't work. So I decided to go on the pill instead. And I also hadn't been sexually active yet. So the thought of getting an IUD placed before other things
Yeah.
had occurred down there, I was like, yeah, no. So I was on the pill for probably 4 years, I think, until I met Luca and became sexually active. And the longer I was on the pill, I did notice it start to impact my CP. Even though I had every doctor I talked to tell me that wasn't possible and that wasn't how birth control worked. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, but I can
I can feel it.
definitely feel it like
Yeah.
really through my body, and my spasticity is at like a 7 all the time instead of like a 3. So you tell me how that happened otherwise.
Yeah.
So yeah, so super, super lucky in that regard. I also had a friend who was an OT, not my OT, but she worked as an OT, and I think it was before I had actually started my period, but it was kind of like, okay, any day now it might happen. She like went out and bought um tampons and pads and deer cups and kind of wanted everything to just let me kind of experiment which type of menstrual supplies was gonna work the best for me. And that's talk about non-traditional OT, like that's not a thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that was kind of how I started my period learning, birth control learning
Mhm.
journey. Funny sidebar. I think what's super interesting is that in all those years of sex ed and all those conversations with the mom and doctors and books about puberty and whatever, no one had told me that when you're on your period, you are consistently bleeding the whole time. And so I remember when I got my first period, which luckily I got it at home. The next day at school, I, went to the bathroom at lunch to change my pad because that's what you did, and I didn't know that keeping a pad in for the whole day would probably be okay. This might be too much.
There's nothing TMI. You're good.
I was watching and I just kept watching and kept watching and kept watching and I was like, it's still bloody, it's still bloody, it's still bloody. Oh my, and like, my lunch period was like 45 minutes and it was like minute 40 and I was still in there laughing and finally I was just like, okay, I guess I'm, just as clean as I'm gonna get and okay, I guess I'll just put a pad in and not eat lunch today because I spent my lunch wiping and I got home and I was telling my mom this and she was like, oh no, honey, like you're bleeding the whole time. You don't really get clean
Yeah.
if you're using a pad. And I was like, oh, well that would have been nice to know in all the 4,000 times I had sex ed.
Yeah.
Like,
You're like, thanks, mom. I'm hungry now. But
exactly. So that was my first period funny story.
yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that nobody talks about with our periods and like what's actually happening and what's happening with our bodies and like all the different stuff. And then right now we have like such a medical system that comes from one lens of view, and that's like the lens of view. And then we have society's lens of view. And like there's so many layers and so many pieces of it. And but it sounds like what I've heard from you throughout the whole conversation today is that you had a really, like, your mom and like your doctor and like the experiences and the people that you had a really wealthy group of people that were able to support you, answer your questions, and probably give you so much that chances are there's a lot of kids and adults that probably have not had that experience. And the way that we create that change moving forward is by all of us becoming aware, like we talked about at the beginning, that inclusivity and like understanding and the knowledge, and even just having this conversation. I guarantee, like, even for me, I'm like, wow, I never would have even considered that like conversation, not from a place of like, it's just ignorance in a lot of big ways. And so what is something that you wish that somebody had told you that didn't? Because it sounds like you had a lot of like, I'm so glad somebody told me this. I mean, clearly the one you just told, that story was different. But like, what is one of those things that you like wish that somebody had told you just in general? And then two, what do you want people that are listening to know so that they can maybe start that, like, just that process and awareness of becoming less ignorant about different lived experiences or different things? Or maybe there's somebody listening that has a child that has CP, and just kind of like broaching those conversations, or even, I mean, not just CP, but it's like autism, I mean, a whole range of things that they could bring up. These, like, are we having these conversations? Are we talking about this? Like, are we treating them with the same lived experience or like the same opportunities as everybody else? Or are we catering and tailoring it because of what we think that is possible for them?
So what was your first question?
What is something you wish somebody had told you? I mean, obviously, other than the one about bleeding all the time, but like, what's something you wish you would have known way back when?
I grew up with people, especially my family, telling me how great my mom was and how unique of an upbringing I had as a kid with a disability.
Yeah.
Um, I really wish I had that epiphany for myself a
Mm-hmm.
lot younger. I didn't have that epiphany until 2018,
Mm-hmm.
when I was working as a direct support professional in the day program. So
Mm-hmm.
sitting on the other side of the table and supporting a woman who was older than me, uh, also had TP, and I knew her to be this outspoken, sassy, like, sense of autonomy having person who could do things. She just like shut down in that meeting setting and had people around her who had been supporting her longer than I had. So presumably knew her better than I did, speaking on her behalf and speaking on things incorrectly that I knew for a fact was incorrect because of the service system and because of how it works. If you're not fortunate enough to have somebody in your corner telling you it doesn't have to be that way, that's what happens is people get used to the system speaking on their behalf, and that's just how it is. And so that experience gave me such a deeper appreciation for my upbringing and just how unique that was, that I wish I had really appreciated that much earlier.
Yeah.
To that extent. And then your second question was, what's something I wish people knew?
Yeah. Like, what would you like? Anybody that's listening to the podcast or whatnot, like how can we help them increase that awareness or that ability to make an impact? Because I'm like, for me, it's like, yes, there's all these other experiences, and like, how can I be a better steward of the skills, the tools, the resources, the experiences I have to help, create that impact, to create change in our world? Because I think it's not coming from, I mean, one, yes, it is. It's like the one-to-one interactions are important, but it's also like a paradigm shift, right? Like our society and our culture needs to have a shift in the way that we're looking at people with disabilities, the way that we're looking at accessibility, the way that we're looking at all of these other layers and things. And it really is a complete paradigm shift that needs to happen. So for those people that are listening, what would you say to them to help kind of start them helping? Because it's going to take more than one person. It's going to take a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
How do we as a society begin to make that paradigm shift to where, like you said, there is nothing wrong with you, right? You are who you are with the skills and the tools and the capabilities that you have, and that's who you are. How do we help create that shift in society so that we and everybody else sees you and people stop asking you those darn inappropriate questions, like how do we do that as a society?
Yeah. Well, you can hire Alva Gardner perspective. Information linked in the show notes.
Totally.
I say that kind of joking, but also like I've seen and I've heard time and time again that the biggest barrier to entry to these conversations is just the simple fact that people aren't talking about it. Just like literally by having me on your podcast, like you said, people hearing this and like having it introduced into their realm of consciousness is huge because it's that um like ignorance due to lack of experience or something like that. There's a more eloquent phrase, but a big part of it is just having that conversation in the room, perspectives in the room. And then the other biggest thing I think is the reconceptualization of what disability is and who is impacted by it. There's such a misconception of disability as a disability as a group of people that people who don't yet experience disability have and don't have a connection to disability have this perception that that is always how it will be, and so they don't need to have this knowledge. They don't need to have this awareness. And one, obviously, that impact how you interact with the world around you. And if nothing else, you are going to interact with somebody with a disability at some point in your life, whether they are open about that disability or not.
Yeah.
And two, this is a slide that I have in every PowerPoint keynote training presentation that I do, which is disability is the largest minority group in the world. And it is the only minority group that anybody can and probably will join at some point in your life, whether that's through aging or injury or medical situation. If you live long enough, you will likely join this group. And so this, I think that's like the foundational problem is that disability is seen as such a us and them context for people who don't yet experience disability that they kind of leave it at that. Well, I don't need to learn about that because it doesn't impact me. And it's like, well, you should want to learn about it because, and you need to learn about it because it does impact what you do and how you navigate the world. But you should also learn about it because odds are it will impact you at some point in your life.
Yeah.
That's what I would.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fascinating even just perspective to look on it too. It's like you said, people have this like almost black and white thinking of like disability or not disabled. Like when, like, just like you're saying is like most people, you live long enough, like most people are going to acquire some type of disability to some extent or another. Like, and so it's not something that you are immune to. It's something that we all have the potential to experience, whether it's direct, like on our own physical body, or if it's somebody we're related to or connected to or in our sphere. And so it is one of those conversations like it does need to be had with everybody, and it does need to go deeper. And I mean, we're kind of wrapping up, but like I listened to the podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, and I know that there's a lot of controversy around that podcast in the first place. But I had this moment listening to the podcast where have you listened to it? Okay. It might be one that you love listening to, but the kind of the premise behind it is what the studies and the stuff that they were doing was that they were finding kids that had nonverbal autism were actually tapping into these other conscious realms, and they were tapping into the ability to talk to each other telepathically, and they were having these like meetings in this basically conscious, like otherworldly 5D type of consciousness source of experiences, right? And talking about like the different spiritual gifts that these kids had and where they were able to tap into things that we as humans, most of us, don't do. And there was a moment when I was listening to this podcast and I was like, wait, what if this like evolutionary process, like we keep hearing like there's a rise in autism and rates are rising. And I know part of that's like our diagnosis criteria is getting higher, but I do think that it is also increasing. I was like, what if the morphing of our world and our society is that we're moving towards this autism realm because that's us now in this 5D consciousness and a whole new, like, what if they're the evolved, not species, but like they're the evolved advancement of human behavior, like humans, right? Like they're evolutionary down the road from us, rather than right now how most of society looks at it as like they do have a disability. But like, what if they don't have a disability? What if they have an enhanced ability to tap into the future of where humankinds are going? Like I had this whole like mind blown sort of feeling of like, what if we have this all backwards? What if they are not behind? Like, what if they are not like, not comprehending or whatever? Like, what if they are not like in our society, like you said, we're seeing what's wrong with them. What if it's not that there's something wrong with them? Like, what if there's something wrong with me? Like, I don't have the consciousness that they do. And they're actually further evolved in like human of evolution than I am. So it's kind of fascinating, even just to sit with things like that. Like, what if
Sure.
our perspective of reality is just not even there. Like it's not truth. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I mean, just the fact that you look at how many people on the spectrum have like savant-ish level skills.
Yes.
Like, yeah, that totally feeds into that realm of perception of what autism is. And I love that. I definitely, if you send me that podcast, I
I
think,
will.
yeah.
Yeah. I do know there's a lot of, controversy around the podcast. Like some people are very angry about the podcast. Some people don't believe it. Like there's a lot of stuff there. But
Mm,
like you said at the beginning, even for me, even if it's like whether it's falsified, whether it's amplified, like whatever, it's like it's that question of like, can we sit in the what if and
mm,
just be open to it, or like open to maybe somebody else's lived experience, or open to the way that we see the world is wrong and that there's another totally different way of seeing the world. Like for me, that's what the podcast did, was just like, wow, what if I just sat with that there's a completely different reality than what I'm experiencing, and that's okay too. And like maybe not have the answer, or not know what it is, or not know how to walk forward, or like to shift or whatever, but like can we just sit with the fact that there's completely different lived experiences or completely different realities, or
yeah.
yeah, all of that. So
Oh, I,
Alva, we covered so much today. Thank you so much for coming on and being open and willing to share. Is there anything you feel like we left out that you want to make sure to share?
well, first, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
This was super fun. I mean, personally, I think there's a whole part two to
Yeah,
this conversation because we didn't even get into like childbirth and pregnancy. Luca and I are starting that journey to grow our family.
that was I had a question I was going to ask you earlier
Yeah,
when I was like, but yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I think there's totally a part two here. I know I could talk for hours and hours and hours about this kind of stuff, but I think
totally.
for a foundational intro, we covered
A
quite a
part,
bit.
a
Yeah,
part one for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, definitely, I would highly encourage you all to go. Like I said, we'll make sure all the links for Alva are hooked up in the show notes. We probably will do a part two at some point, because I was like sitting there. I was like, I wonder if they've like, if you want kids, like, are you wanting to have kids and whatnot? So that was a question I was going to ask, and then it got sidetracked. But so I would love to have that whole conversation
Yeah.
there and things like that. And yeah, so we'll definitely have to hook up for that at some point in the future.
Great.
But thank you so, so much. This has been amazing. And I hope you have a fabulous day.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it.
Thank you.